what's the bar for news in this country? Like, what exactly does it take for journalism in this country to think something's a big deal? This is a question I'm asking all the time. And I'm asking it on these videos. I'm asking it in my daily life. I'm asking it as I'm preparing the daily news podcast, which you should listen to. And I don't really have a good answer to that. Though this past week we got maybe another glimpse into like, what's the barometer for news anymore? What is considered like a big story? Okay, so if a train that catches fire and is barreling towards the downtown of a city in Canada, is that news? It's barreling towards the downtown, it's on fire, it's like, oh my God, it's got hazardous waste on the rail cars. Is that news? Firefighters got to it before anything exploded. Nothing exploded, no one died. Is that news? Well, seemingly the answer is no, because outside of the community of London, Ontario, no one seems to be talking about the fact that a runaway train that was on fire went barreling through London, Ontario, stopping in a residential community, only to have the fire put out by fire crews. Now, maybe we should be more sensitive to something like this, considering that an entire downtown has been incinerated by a runaway flaming train before in this country. But let's talk about what happened in London first. So the other night, a couple nights ago, I can give you the exact date. Does it really matter? Doesn't really matter. It was like whatever time I just got home from Edmonton, Sunday night. Whatever. It's a YouTube video. You're probably watching this 6 months from now. It doesn't matter. So a train flaming, went downtown London. It was on fire. And, there is a report from one of London's best journalists, who's Kate Dubinsky, and she has, tried to figure out, put it all together, what we know so far about this flaming train. Now, it seems like what happened was the train stopped near Strathroy, which if you know the area, you know what Strathroy is. If you don't, then who cares? And picked up 5 cars full of rail ties. They were covered in flammable materials, and it is not clear at what point the material set on fire. So in her article, Dubinsky poses the several questions that have yet to be answered. Question 1, when did the train crew notice the fire on board, and why didn't they call 911? Very good questions. 2, why did the train stop where it did in the middle of a residential neighborhood just west of a shunting yard? So I guess it just stopped. We don't even know why it stopped. We don't know at what point something stopped this train. 3, how did the railway ties coated in flammable wood preservative creosote catch fire? And the last question, did the fire spread from one car to the others, or did these rail ties just all set on fire at once? Eventually it was stopped, and it was stopped in front of an office building and an apartment complex. And Dubinsky reports that fire crews were able to get the hazardous material away from the fire before there was any major disaster. Now, Dubinsky does something really great in this article, which I wish journalists would do more, which is kind of to quietly register how unacceptable a corporate response is to a media request. And so she writes, the company sent a 2-sentence statement to CBC News in response to a request for an interview. You don't have to say that it's only 2 sentences, but it's excellent to say that when you would expect a bigger response to, hey, flaming rail cars in our neighborhood, what the hell? And the company responded to say, the incident remains under investigation. We thank the London first responders for their effective response to the fire last night. That came from the spokesperson of the owner of the train, Terry Cunha. I do love the use of first responders and their effective response. Terry was working really hard when he came up with that little quote there. So here you have it. The company is Canadian Pacific. Oh my God. I was going to say whatever. Canadian Pacific, Kansas Southern. It's a company that was created in a merger last year. Of course, you've heard probably of the Canadian Pacific Railway, the CPR, kind of a majorly iconic Canadian private railway, and the Kansas City Southern Railway Company. Now, these companies merged, and the merger was worth $31 billion. So this is like really high stakes business. This is very profitable business. And it is not too surprising that profitable businesses are where we see these kinds of, lapses in security or safety or, I don't know, fire stopping or not allowing. So it's one thing. This story is like news on its own. Flaming train flying through downtown. Okay, but I've already alluded to this. It's a whole other level of importance in Canada, where a flaming train went through the downtown of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, and that happened 10 years ago. And I hope know this story. The train goes to the downtown and incinerates the downtown, killing 47 people there. It was actually not the worst rail disaster in Canada. Wikipedia tells me that's the 4th worst rail disaster in Canada, but it has left the town of Lac-Mégantic forever changed. I mean, Lac-Mégantic is not a big town. 47 people dying in that town was an incredible loss, and people remain traumatized, of course, to this day. Now, in the aftermath of that, there were a lot of questions posed, like what happened on the regulatory side to have allowed for this train to land up in the downtown of Lac-Mégantic and incinerate the downtown. And there were a lot of things that became evident that the company, Montreal, Maine and Atlantic, had been doing to cut back on safety features, including cutting back significantly on crew. Now, Dubinsky has a picture of the burned out rail cars from London, and there's a little cut line, little description of the photo that she took that says cars filled to the brim with railway ties sit at the CPKCR rail yard near Quebec Street in London, Ontario. Now, filled to the brim with railway ties, that may be an indication of what's up there. Overstocking, who knows? Or maybe it's totally normal to put so many flammable materials together. I don't know. But, there were many lessons that could have been learned from the Lac-Mégantic situation. And I'm not sure there's been very many things that have happened as a result. In fact, after Lac-Mégantic, the owner, which was Montreal, Maine, Atlantic, and then a whole bunch of other subsidiaries, and who owned the tracks and who owned the cars, and so there was actually many, many companies involved with it, has since become part of Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern. So here we go again. Like, it's just corporate concentration, no regard at all to the communities that are impacted by these potential disasters, and apparently not much control over being able to stop them. Now, there was, of course, a settlement for the victims of the disaster in Lac-Mégantic. There was a $460 million fund that companies tied to the disaster all contributed to. The main company, Montreal, Maine, Atlantic, was in bankruptcy protection or whatever. So there's a bit like, creditors and all this kind of thing and getting involved with the payout. But on like the government's promises to make sure this, I don't know, never happens again. The biggest promise that they made was to bypass the downtown rail corridor so that the people of Lac-Mégantic wouldn't have to have the trains going through their downtown anymore. It's been 10 years. There was an announcement made in October 2023 saying like, okay, we're about to sign contracts to make this happen 10 years later. And so who knows when that will actually happen. But there's tracks that go downtown in towns and cities all over Canada. And trains carry flammable materials all the time. Maybe it's a testament to the efficacy and structural integrity of the cars that were carrying flammable materials that they didn't ignite, or maybe fire crews got there before there could have been a chance for ignition, or maybe we're just lucky that nothing punctured one of the flammable material, like the liquefied flammable material that was being carried on the trains. But trains in Canada, that's what they transport. They transport petroleum products. They transport flammable materials, and they are often running right through the downtown of towns and cities all over this country. The most important thing in Canada is oil. And the most important thing in Canada about oil is how you move oil, and how do we get oil from point A to point B, and can we get a pipeline? That's so much safer than these trains and all this kind of like idiocy and bullshit that we hear around debates around pipelines. But there's very little discussion to no discussion about the public cost to these projects. about the risks that communities take all the time without having any idea that they're taking risks, because this hazardous material is going in and out of their towns all the time. And with the primary promise of the federal government to the people of Lac-Mégantic still not actually being realized a decade later, it is pretty clear who runs stuff in this country. It's the corporations. It's the corporations that tell us what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, and for what price. And, you know, Canada's never really had control over the railways, but at least there was like a dance that happened to kind of, well, I mean, the politicians were actually really involved with the railways, and when there was corruption, they kind of got nailed over that corruption. You know, that's back in the day when politics kind of functioned. Now it's completely hidden. It's completely hidden. And this American company owns one of Canada's most important rail lines, one of Canada's few rail lines. And if we're imagining how to create new rail corridors across this country, whether to transport people, imagine we care about people, or to transport more goods to different parts of this country, the corporations are a huge part of this conversation. And in fact, they become the reason why we can't. They become the owners of the track, and therefore we can't mess with those tracks. We can't put passengers on those tracks, or the freight rail has a priority over these over the tracks, and so you're always waiting for it to pass, right? That's why we'll never have high-speed rail on the tracks that we actually have in this country, and we have to see all this as being really connected, right? So anyway, what makes a story in Canada? I think a flaming train through a downtown city in a country that 10 years ago 47 people were killed by a flaming train. But what do I know? What do I know?